we're going to move on now to a debate on tax credits, and the Minister is in his place, and I invite Joe Swinson.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Hancock. I'm pleased to have been able to secure this debate on tax credits, and I very much welcome the opportunity to put concerns to the Minister on behalf of my constituents. However, it is regrettable that so long after the problems with the tax credit system were identified, the mistakes are still recurring and even getting worse. Difficulties with tax credits cause stress and heartache at the best of times. But in this time of economic hardship, sudden demands for repayments could be enough to push many families over the financial edge. It is more important than ever, therefore, that the Government acts to reduce the misery which maladministration of tax credits is causing to families across Britain. The fundamental problem with the administration of tax credits is that the system is too complicated. Not only is it difficult for claimants to understand what their entitlements are, but Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs officials have found it so difficult to administer themselves that an endless catalogue of mistakes has resulted in more than £14 billion of public money being lost through overpayments, fraud and error since April 2003. If the system is not simplified, that figure will surely continue to rise. In this short debate, I will highlight three major problems with tax credits: overpayments, underpayments, and worryingly the non-claiming of tax credits by many of those who are eligible. In 2006-07, 1 in 5 families who claimed tax credits were overpaid. That's 1.2 million families being overpaid a total of £1.1 billion by HMRC. Across the last 4 years, nearly 2 million families have been overpaid more than once, and some 60,000 have been overpaid 3 times or more. While the Government has acknowledged that this is a problem, the figures indicate that it has not yet been addressed. On the contrary, it has even got worse, with 400,000 more families last year being overpaid than the year before. The Parliamentary Ombudsman has referred to this as systematic maladministration. And let's be clear about the situation that this leaves people in. They fill in all the forms, provide all the information that has been asked for, and then have their life made a little bit easier by the tax credit payments. Then one day, out of the blue, a letter drops through the door demanding repayment of a large sum of money. Understandably, many families are shocked and anxious when they read such a letter. The average overpayment in 2006-07 was £916, a considerable amount of money, especially when you consider that the majority of claimants are families on low incomes. For many families, the overpayment is in the region of several thousand pounds, an unthinkable sum for working families to suddenly have to find. Just to take some of the comments of my constituents who have been in this scenario, one constituent wrote to me and said, "I was traumatised." Now that traumatised is an intense word to use, but this is the emotion that people are feeling when suddenly they have this financial bombshell dropped upon them. And then in dealings with the Tax Credit Office and many phone calls and letters, a common thing is summed up by one constituent who says, "I am completely frustrated and disillusioned." Mr Hancock, Elizabeth O'Brien is a single mother in my constituency. When her son left school in 2005 and she continued to receive tax credits, she immediately contacted the Tax Credit Office, both by phone and in writing, to check whether she was still eligible. Despite her efforts to keep the Tax Credit Office informed of her situation, this eventually resulted in an overpayment of nearly £2,000, £1,982.92. Mrs O'Brien was very distressed when she came to my surgery, explaining how she was having difficulty affording the repayments, and she has even had to cancel her £8 monthly union subscription, which is somewhat ironic, I feel, that the policies of a Labour government are leaving people unable to afford their union dues. Although the Tax Credit Office is responsible for Mrs O'Brien's overpayment, it has refused to write it off. So at the rate of £25 per month, my constituent will be paying for the Tax Credit Office's mistake until the year 2015. The need for continual updates of the claimant's information has caused huge difficulties. This is not an isolated case. So would it surely not be simpler to have a system of payments fixed on a 6-monthly basis to reduce the risk of miscalculation? The system is so complex that even the Tax Credit Office can't seem to work out how much people are due. Another couple in my constituency, Mr and Mrs Macmillan, have received a number of contradictory letters with reference to their income. I have copies of 2 award notices, one on the 10th of November 2006 and one on the 6th of December 2006, which list the exact same income for the couple, but give different amounts for the award. So on the 10th of November, it was £3,026.06, but less than a month later, with the exact same information, the award is more than £1,000 lower at £1,897.66. If the Tax Credit Office themselves can't decide on how much people are due, then how on earth can ordinary people be expected to work it out? Yet this is exactly what the government asks people to do. Because it is not uncommon, Mr Hancock, for scanning or input errors at the Tax Credit Office to result in overpayments. My constituent Mrs Gallagher was overpaid almost £5,000 after the Tax Credit Office incorrectly recorded her and her husband's income as £340 rather than the correct amount in the region of £30,000. Although she provided accurate information from the start, she didn't spot the Tax Credit Office's mistake and the overpayments continued for 2 years. Mrs Gallagher is a carer and her husband is a teacher, and they've had to remortgage their house already and are struggling on their current income. The repayments that the Tax Credit Office have now demanded are making life even more difficult. And like many others, they are unable to sell their home at this time with the current market. I wrote to the Tax Credit Office in December about this case, have so far received no response, and the money continues to be recovered. This couple, Mr and Mrs Gallagher, now face the possible repossession of their home as a result of these problems. And I would be very grateful if the Minister would agree to look into this particular case and get me an answer for my constituents. But more generally, I would ask the Minister to offer a statutory right of appeal to all claimants against overpayments and to write off overpayments which result from official errors. Perhaps, if nothing else, that would be an incentive for the Tax Credit Office to get it right. In cases where it is the Tax Credit Office and not the claimant who has made an error, surely the Tax Credit Office should carry the burden of proof rather than expecting claimants to identify its own mistakes. In another case, my constituent Claire Robertson was able to resolve problems with an overpayment. However, she went to the cash point one day to find that £6,000 had been put into her account with no explanation or warning. And given her past experiences, she was understandably somewhat suspicious of this. She told me, "I was yet again left in a state of shock and disbelief. Not being able to obtain any details relating to the transaction until Monday morning, I once again had a worrying weekend. It transpired that the money was an automatic pay-in from tax credits for an amount outstanding. I feel the manner in which this institute deals with people's lives and emotions is disgusting. First of all, I'm facing legal proceedings with an amount of approximately £10,000, and now I receive £6,000 with no explanation or warning. I don't think my nerves can take much more." These cases demonstrate that whether or not the mistake was made by the claimant or the Tax Credit Office, and even when the claimant has been diligent in contacting the Tax Credit Office to point out its mistakes, it is the claimant who is still made to suffer, often over many years of repayment. And at a time when the government is keen to be seen to be cracking down on benefit fraud, this system provides a disincentive to claimants to demonstrate honesty in coming forward when a mistake has been made. More and more families are being taken to court over this issue by HMRC, with the average monthly number of court cases in the current tax year being 9 times higher than in the previous year. Between April and October 2008, 5,697 families were taken to court to recover money lost through overpayments, all at the expense of the taxpayer. So not only is HMRC being so cavalier with taxpayers' money in the first place that it pays out too much to a million-plus families, it then compounds its mistakes by starting thousands of costly court actions. But it's not just overpayments that are the problem. There's a lot of underpayments happening as well. In fact, since 2003, 3.3 million people have been underpaid tax credits. And again, these mistakes have often happened multiple times. So 555,000 families were underpaid more than once, and 82,000 were underpaid 3 times or more. In 2006-07, 135,000 families were underpaid by more than £1,000, and 326,000 families on an income of less than £15,000 a year were underpaid. Now, missing out on £1,000 of income would be extremely difficult at the best of times, but in the current economic climate, its impact is felt even more deeply. In hard-pressed families, that money is the money they deserve, and it is needed for buying basic groceries, children's clothes, and paying essential household bills. In 2004-05, HMRC estimated that only 61% of eligible families claimed the working tax credit, and 82% of eligible families claimed the child tax credit. Some of the people who aren't claiming just don't know that they're eligible. Others say the procedure for claiming is too complicated. And perhaps most worryingly, Mr. Hancock, others still, including some of my constituents who have said this to me in my surgeries and written it in letters, have claimed tax credits in the past and have decided that they will not claim again because they have had such a bad experience the first time round. So this system that is meant to help people has proved so frustrating, so worrying, and caused so much misery that people are now actually reluctant to claim. And that is a truly damning indictment of the tax credit system. Back in 2001, when the government announced the introduction of the working tax credit and child tax credit, the then Paymaster General, the Right Honourable Member for Bristol South, announced in a press release, "The government is delivering on its promise to introduce a new streamlined system of tax credits. It will provide a secure stream of income for children, whether parents are in or out of work." But very early on, it became clear the system was not as streamlined as promised, and in 2005, the Right Honourable Lady announced, "The government has looked to learn from the early operation of the system and will continue to do so." The cases that I've described, and the many others like them, demonstrate very clearly that, more than 3 years later, the complexity of the tax credit system is still a fundamental flaw. If the government's own objective was to provide a secure stream of income for families with children, then by its own standards it has failed. As these cases show, claimants feel anything but secure. Why has the application system not been simplified to eradicate the problems the Tax Credit Office is having in processing them correctly? And given the complexity of a system in which 9 out of 10 families are eligible for some means-tested tax credits, I asked the Minister whether it would not be more sensible and cost-effective to use the universal benefit system which is already in place. Would the Minister at least consider an official review of the efficiency and cost-effectiveness of the present system? Mr. Hancock, I would like to leave you with the words of one of the many people who has suffered at the hands of the tax credit system. After a particularly harrowing experience in which a constituent of mine received a letter from the Tax Credit Office demanding £17,000, she wrote to me saying, "I wish I had never received family tax credits, and not because I don't think it's a wonderful concept, but because of the way it is implemented. This has to stop." I quite agree, Mr. Hancock, and I look forward to the government's response.